Maybe Emily will have.
Hi, here we go.
Great. Okay, awesome.
All right, we could also do quick intros. I forgot about that. I can kick us off. I'm Franciska. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at Amplitude and also a advisor for young startups in the developer space. Now I'll pass it to Apoorva.
Hi, everyone. My name is Apoorva Pandhi. I'm a engineer turned operator turned investor, currently a partner at Foundation Capital. And prior to this, have led many different kinds of roles, including being a founder and a go-to-market practitioner. Excited to kind of kick this off with all of you.
Well, I guess I'm last.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I guess I will just flow into the next thing, right? Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm gonna do an intro with the whole with this, anyways. Well, hey, I'm Tim. I'm a partner, founder, I guess, for Essence VC, and before that, I was the founder myself. And I think the whole point of this very first session is not to teach any go-to-market tactics right away, but actually to talk about why go-to-market actually even matters. And I'm going to use my own story to kick it off, because I'm a quick intro about me from my background. I'm also engineer for most of my career. I worked on infrastructure. I work on open source. I was Apache projects. I'm PMC for Drill and Mesos. I was early engineer and employee at Mesosphere. And after 3 years at Mesosphere, I started a company called Hyperpilots, raised a seed round, and we learned all the hard lessons we needed to learn. And plenty of folks here are very familiar names. And I see a lot of people have gone down that same path like I did. So I'm really just here to kick off my story. And if you're an engineer, actually, we'll be curious. If you're an engineer looking to start a company, or already just started your first one, if you feel free, maybe even drop in a Zoom chat. Just tell us that what is your company about or something. That'll be great. So my story and why go-to-market actually matters and why we're doing this in the first place is very simple. Is because go-to-market really matters. My background, like I said, I was an engineer working on infrastructure, and spent most of my career working on like open source. And I spent in particularly I worked on like big data stuff in the beginning, like Spark, right, Kafka, Hadoop's kind of things. And I went to a Mesosphere. I worked a lot of Mesos. So when I'm rolling back the clock, back in 2014, that's when I just joined Mesosphere. And I spent almost 2.5 to 3 years there, working in the early days of Docker, working early days of Mesos and Kubernetes. It's clear that there's something going on, right? I'm just talking about why I decided to start a company. It's clear that Docker is taking off. It's clear that Kubernetes is taking off. There's some market opportunity here, and we feel like I have lots of leverage and networks and insights to probably go after. And so I raised a seed round very early days. Actually, my co-founder, he's a professor from Stanford called Christos Kozirakis, and other co-founders as head of product from CoreOS. We all started with the idea that, hey, we can build a product, and I think we should be able to find customers. And we don't know how, but we'll build a product. And our product was very simple, or not very simple, actually. We had an idea that containers will eventually need a way to save people to save money and help them improve performance, right? That was the core idea based on my co-founder's research. And I think one really big hard roadblock that, I'm just rolling the clock faster, we raise around with a pitch deck. We have insights about what we can do in this space, and we have problems that we think we live the future, right? We think everybody will need this. There's a big gap between what we believe, how people will able to understand what a product is and understand what we're trying to do, versus what people perceive what we're doing. And there was a big gap, and that took a long time for us to figure out. So I think in go-to-market land, there's basically two big divides. One is before you have product market fit, there's every startup needs to have a lot of different ways to try and experiment. And part of that is the go-to-market with it. one thing that we didn't really work out early enough was, we just figured out how to build what we think we need to build, but we didn't really spend that much time of how do we even get to know who needs this. And we thought everybody will need it. It was one thought. But then we quickly realized after we talked to like 30, 40, we've talked to almost 100 more people and customers, right? And it's clear that not everybody needed as much. And so go-to-market is part of the equation that we realized, hey, we can't just throw it off for everyone and say everybody will need it. And we can't just all use the same approach, like, hey, we're going to solve your costs, we're going to solve your performance, and we're going to have to do a lot of different variation and trials. It's very nuanced. It's like we realize that what we say to people and how we engage with them, how they get to know us, all these little steps actually matters. How successfully can we close, even like a POC or design partnership, or even down the line closing a sales call with them, right? And that really, and in the runs of a startup, we got better over time of like, okay, we need to speak this way. We need to show them something much more earlier, where we had to do all these right things to finally able to accelerate the progress on each conversation. And that's why I think go-to-market was super tough. I believe most founders will learn over time, but what we lost, the biggest lesson I learned is the time, right? In startup, time is the most precious resource we all have, right? So I wish I could have learned a lot about this. And there's a famous saying I think it's Justin from Justin TV. You're talking about like a first-time founder, they focus on product. Second-time founder, focus on distribution. And now you started to realize distribution, or the way to get to know who your customers are, what do they need, how do you position it, how do you get to them, really changes the momentum and changes trajectory of your company, right? And so that also changes a lot of the equations of how soon you should raise, how soon you should hire, and what do you even build. A lot of them are all tied together, and go-to-market is so integrated part of that. I'm not going to touch on too much details. I just want to kick it off to say like, hey, we spent almost a year and a half in the desert, or a year or so in the sort of desert, searching for the right product, the right way to engage, the right way to sell. And we tried, from doing this different kind of consulting, doing demos, doing different ways of getting and catching customers. It finally works. That it takes a lot longer. And so like the core lesson I learned, what I tell for engineers is that, it will take a lot longer, not just because it takes a lot longer to build your product. It actually takes a lot longer to figure out who truly your customers are and what they actually need, and how you're actually going to be able to engage with them, right? And build the muscles and build a sort of intuition as a team. And so there's a lot of insights I think we want to be able to share and able to have lots of different people in this program who will come in and talk to us. So I'll stop there as a quick intro about my journey. And I'm sure if you have any questions or any particular things, feel free to ask and we can engage more. But all right, I'll pass it to, I'll pass it to Franciska for now.
Before we move it, yeah, go ahead, Franciska.
Yeah, I have a few questions, Tim, now that there are no, but there are no other questions. I'm curious, like this is a hard question, but like if you started a company today, like what is the biggest thing that you would do differently than what you did?
Yeah, and it was funny because I'm working with so many founders too, and it's a very interesting. I think I had too little idea how hard it is to actually find the right customers and able to actually realize what's the right way to engage with them. And like I said, and so going back, if I ever do a company again, which I don't think so, but or helping any company in this space, is really to like crystallize more why do you think people will actually care about this, and how much do you actually do the validation for that? And one thing I didn't also think too much about before was the friction, right? The friction of people able to adopt any infrastructure product. In my mind, or back in when I was engineer working on Mesos or Kubernetes, right? I guess we worked in a space where there's early set of enthusiasts and passionate people, and they pick it up, right? They work with you and all of that. And you kind of sometimes take that for granted. Now going from scratch again, right? Nobody know who you are. Well, some people know who you are, but not the project, not the team, not the company, not the space. There's so much more trust that needs to be built from your customers. And you can't just go in with a big bang. It's almost like redesigning what is step-by-step way to get your core audience to be buying in, to be the core believers, right? That they really, really love your stuff. It takes a lot of thoughts to it. I realize it's actually not that easy. You kind of break it down the problem to simpler, right? Get them to be very excited some way, right? There's nuances there, but I guess when I back then, the product was too heavy and too big and harder to just grasp, because I was trying to sell that, hey, if you do all this stuff, you're going to have huge benefits, right? But that really works, especially in the earliest days of the company, unless you're in a space where like everyone is super ready. But we're also going to a space where the timing was also early. And so that was the nuances too. So I think going back, doing it again was actually breaking down the space even more. Like, is there a smaller part of the problem I can do? Is there a person or people can actually try this and use it in a meaningful way without having to do all this stuff or having to like believe in all the other things you believe in, right? Like just start simple. I found actually much more useful. Yeah.
I had a question as well, like being a founder, right? And also now as an investor, like when you think of someone founding a company after doing like some customer work, right? Like over here, you spoke about how like you went out with the product and you realized that the product was either too broad for the market or you didn't really realize like who the right users were. But if you're doing the groundwork for that, you're either talking to customers, getting their feedback, trying to assess their pain points, not really asking them, because like by asking, no one tells you what their pain points are. But if you're assessing their pain points, that's one way, right? You've basically spoken to like X number of people. Do you think, in your opinion, after being a founder and now an investor, that's enough to kind of talk to X number of people and see like, oh, X number of people have said that this is a really like hair on fire problem for them. Like, that's why I'm going down the path of building this, versus, oh, I'll build something small. If it kind of works for like a smaller set of people and they're happy with it, that's when I'll go out and kind of build a company around it. Or there's a third approach, because like everyone kind of comes with a different mindset of starting something. And when you're starting something, you're in that for like the next at least decade or so. So how do you ensure that you're going down the path of building something that's actually valuable versus might be just theoretical for people?
Yeah. And I think the truthful answer, no one really knows at the earliest stage, even the founders themselves, right? Like, I knew something needs to happen in the future. I think there's a large opportunity because we have something unique we can offer, but I don't know how it's going to happen, to be honest. Like, it's something that you instinctively feel like it should happen, but is it starting small? Is it starting large? And where and how many people you talk to? I guess as an engineer, you never had the need ever to go talk to 100 people and ask them what they need before, right? Even that is actually a brand new task I had to learn, like the mom test, right? And all this sort of like resources, I kind of read it, but didn't really register. And I read it again. I was okay. I wasn't doing any of this. It's totally bad. But it's I guess the answer to that, I feel like, is not really about any particular mechanism, like talk to X, Y people or start small, or is more the process, right? It's the process of, are you actually able to listen the right way to whoever your customers are, and able to formulate a really solid hypothesis what we can actually test, and how do we test it really quickly without losing time? Because in startup land, everything is, I believe everybody can iterate towards a direction, but it's just how much time you spend. And in startup land, you cannot spend that much time, unfortunately. You can't spend years or sometimes even months to try, and you have only few shots ever to try in a startup, you can only find the truth, or you have very, very unlikely to find the truth of what actually will work. And we spend too long sometimes on some false signals. And I can even talk about more, but the false signals can really kill you. Large company wants to try you or some other things. You easily spend months of time building and it never really went anywhere, right? They had to go back to the drawing board. And so I think it's nuances, right? It's in the end of the day, is there a market there? If there's a market, you should be able to find a way. I mean, it's a large enough market, you should find something. But it's not going to be obvious from day one, unfortunately. And so that's why, working with founders from day one is not about exactly what they know. I think it's really about how they work. That, hey, I think there's a high likelihood, the way they think, the way they work, the way they talk, we can find something. Because everybody gets it wrong almost, for all the companies I backed, and including ourselves. We try so many different products to finally find something that works, that fits the market, fits the time, fits it takes time, unfortunately. Yeah. Cool.
There's a question in the chat. So if your co-founding team is a CTO and CEO, who would you say is the most important next hire in the context of going to market? And at what point should you hire?
Well, I can answer that, I guess, very quickly. I usually flip that question around because, a lot of times, especially when I was starting off, right? Both me and, my co-founder was as a professor, we never done anything else besides technical stuff that much, right? So we actually was hoping we can find yet another co-founder to do all the other stuff for us, help us to do marketing, help us find product. But the true answer, usually the founder themselves has to be good enough. It won't be the best, but you have to be good enough to do all of that, because you don't know. No one's going to help you as much than the founding team. And so it's a nuanced question. Like, I think for the most part, you need to get to learn the basics of go-to-market, which is what we're helping you here. Right? This is why it matters for everyone to learn this, not just a few people in your company. Learn this first. And then it will be more obvious, because once something is working, then the next hire depends on what kind of market you're in, right? Depends what kind of team you're in. It might be sales. It might be a business development person, right? It might be actually a marketing person straight away. And it all depends. And we'll talk about it in this series, right? Because go-to-market is not just one term, one way. There's so many different ways, and depends on what exactly you're doing. But the point you should hire is when actually a little bit something is working. Not try to hire someone to figure everything out from the beginning, I think.
Yeah, you can't hire to fix your problems. You gotta fix them, or at least try and experiment and do some of this work yourself before you can hire out. So same with like sales, right? As a founder, you want to be able to sell the product yourself many times before you hire someone to do it. Because if you can't sell it, someone you hire won't at all be able to sell it.
Yeah. That's why I think we typically try and find founding teams that have the product instinct as well. Like you need to kind of understand like what the product, or at least define what the product is before like bringing anyone on board, because that person is following a playbook, and that playbook is given by you as a founder, or is discovering the playbook with you. But no marketing or salesperson as an external hire can close an account or at least a repeatable sales model for you without you being involved early on in the process.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Franciska, on to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to take it. There's one more question though, so maybe we take that one first, and then I can share a little bit about my background. How many early customers, too many and too early? What are the early signs that the team should really throttle initial adoption to avoid overextending the newborn infra and non-existing customer support framework? That's a nice problem to have.
Yeah. Well, if you have throttle adoption, well, at least you have a sign. What I think, anyway, this might be a little tangential, but I think it always depends, right? It always depends on what exactly you're doing, and are they actually adopting you, or are they all just doing actually interest? Or, I mean, if it's a real adoption, then a lot of times what founders mostly they don't do is, hey, not just take the breaks, but take it as a way to extend your resources sometimes, like, hey, we could actually start accelerating things instead of waiting. But, there's never a true answer to this, right? Sometimes you can scale too fast or too early. But a lot of things are false signals that I usually tell founders, like, hey, people saying they're interested or doing certain things may not actually mean they're actually gonna use you in production and paying you the law contracts. Like there's a big gap in between, typically speaking. And so it's sometimes a little hard to answer this because it depends on how serious this conversations and actions they took for commitment to show that. But hey, if they show a lot, it's a good problem. Yeah. It's you can use many different ways to do it, but I don't know if there's a framework here.
But we're also being like pretty targeted on what you want to have as your value prop, because like many times when you come up with a early idea, it can be extended in like several different directions, and there could be customers who could be pulling you in all those different directions. So be able to like say no to few early customers is also okay if you want to focus on a certain set of customers and scale with them first before you kind of address all kinds of problems. So I think just like spreading yourself too thin early on across many use cases and many problems might not be the best use of time as well.
Yeah. And scale as much as you can until you see unhappy customers, right? If you start to see churn early on, that's probably a good sign that you need to throttle or focus. All right, I can share a little bit. So nice to meet you all. I have a different background, not an engineer, but been working with engineers and in data startups for most of my career, although I actually started in venture capital. So kind of opposite to Apoorva and Tim in that regard. I thought I could share a little bit about my experience at the three main companies I worked at. So one being, 7th employee, first non-technical hire. So potentially one of those, to answer that question, a first hire on the go-to-market side, really building out the foundation. Second role at sort of a few million ARR, we figured some things out, but hadn't figured out much else than just getting that initial product market fit. And then the last one being my current role at Amplitude, where we definitely figured out a lot of stuff. And now we're just sort of on the road to 1 billion. So there is light. There can be light at the end of the tunnel, which is always nice to hear when you're just starting out. So this is not in chronological order, but in order of small to large. So a few learnings from my time at Iteratively. Employee number 7, just building out the go-to-market function from scratch. Actually, something that Tim also mentioned around running experiments. We were running a lot of small scale tests on what kind of traction we saw when we did podcasts, did paid ads, did media syndication, all of those things that can potentially generate demand and adoption. But then we also invested in a few core things that we believed were going to have an impact long-term. So for us, that was things like content and our product experience for new users. So whole onboarding and activation. So don't try to do too much and test as you're early and see what sticks, but also do invest in some core things that you think are going to drive traction over time, especially things like content that take time to actually give you a return. And then another thing I would highlight is like think of your product in the early days as lead gen, not that you need to have a fully fledged, polished, enterprise ready solution before you go to market. Get the product out there and get early feedback, and don't see it as a detractor that you're not potentially at where you believe that you need to be. I think working with engineers, they tend to want to make something perfect or better, and it can always be better, but release early and get it out there in front of people. And then there's the last little learning I would share here is that, and it's related to the other one. So launch early and launch often. When you're small and you're just getting started, every little mention on social and Hacker News or Product Hunt launch or whatever it is gives you a traffic bump. It gives you an increased awareness, and you just got to keep doing that over and over again with everything that you can think of. Like we're in alpha, we're in beta, we're in open beta, we've just launched, we have a new feature. So think of all these things as launches and then treat them as proper campaigns that you need to put effort into. Next role was at a company called Snowplow. We were open source product. I was the 30th employee there around that time, and there was no marketing team, more or less, when I joined. And I joined to build out that marketing team. So very engineering led and engineering focused company there, and a very interesting way to think about marketing. We had a large open source community, and this was before community has become such a buzzword around community-led growth and everything else. And I think one thing that we missed out on was really not capitalizing, but investing in our community. So we had a lot of users, but we didn't treat them well. We didn't focus our attention on them because it was hard to prove that they would eventually turn into customers. And so it can be hard sometimes in marketing and go to market to prove that, hey, you invest in a dollar here, you'll get $1 or $2 out the other end. But that shouldn't deter you necessarily for investing in core things like a community. I think that's more obvious today with all the great communities out there, but it's very interesting to see from firsthand. Another anecdote I wanted to share was around understanding your audience, which Tim also talked about. So at Snowplow, we had this idea that the head of data was our core persona, our core buyer. And we always talked about the head of data, what they need, what the challenges were, what tools they were buying, what they cared about. And then finally, we ended up doing some analysis on our customer profiles and our buyers from our top 40 customers, and not a single one of them had the title head of data. And so we were a little bit surprised. The title was more in the line of head of engineering. And while that can seem like a small difference in some companies, it is actually a huge difference in terms of needs, desires, challenges, where they report into, etc. And so that was a huge learning. Like, don't assume that you know your customer. Actually go and analyze their customer base or user base and talk to them and understand who they are, map them out, build an understanding, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And then another last one is around being purely sales-led. So at Snowplow, we had an open source offering that you could go and use yourself, but our managed service was only through a sales approach, right? Long sales cycle, explaining the value, explaining why we're different, and then only once they signed up with us and paid us a lot of money, they would get the benefits. And so that is how we used to sell software. That's how Salesforce and Adobe still sell software, but that's not how most companies sell software today and how most buyers expect to buy software. And so being able to lead with the product and lead with the value and show value up front is going to be hugely important, I think, to your success as founders. Last gig, now I'm at Amplitude. We actually, my previous company, Iteratively, part of Tim's Essence portfolio, we were acquired by Amplitude last year. And so now I get the chance to see inside a much larger company. We went public last year. We're sort of on the road to 1 billion in revenue, launching new products. We have made it in the sense that we have gone a long way and have had huge success. Some of the learnings I've seen so far from here is that crossing the chasm is real. So if you haven't read that book and you're further along in your journey or just want to see what's ahead, I would strongly recommend that you read it and understand how your business will change over time. And the people that you hire today when you're early are not necessarily people you need when you have crossed sort of, 10, 15, maybe 100 million in revenue. And so the fabric of your company and everything that you're doing is going to change. How you sell from feature-based to value-based. You got to think about creating a category. You got to think about all sorts of things that might not matter today. So it's a bit of a journey. The other thing I would mention is investing in self-service early is a benefit that you will be thankful for later. At Amplitude, we are more sales-led when it comes to sort of acquiring paying customers, although we have a nice free plan for users to get started. But it's a whole different sales motion and understanding of how to acquire new customers. And so getting that in early as opposed to later is something I would strongly recommend. And then the last thing, data is crucial. I don't think anyone will disagree with this one, but I've seen a lot of the younger startups that I work with. They don't actually track a lot of what they're doing, and so they don't have an understanding of what's working and what's not. And especially in the early days, but also very important in the later days, but really understanding what is driving those three leads you get a day or 3 new signups you got last week. If you don't know where they come from, how can you invest further? So that's a bit, a few learnings from my time at different companies, and hopefully helpful. Yeah, it was crossing the chasm. Classic.
A question for you before, I don't know if you have more questions over here yet. I think there's one. Love all the PLG products today, but any tips on GTM for traditional industry?
Yeah, I mean, traditional industry meaning, let's say something that you can't try before you buy. So if that's what's intended here. At Snowplow, we did a lot of things to make trying before buying a reality. So things like showing the data structure of how it looked, the data that we collected, and showing the benefits. We tried to productize a version of our product that people could try before they buy. And so it really is around showing value up front. And if you can't show that with your product directly or with that company's product, I would find ways around that, like demo experiences, sandbox environments, whatever it is, to try to show what you do and the value that you bring to teams.
Maybe I can add a little bit. Sorry, this is Shaosu. I can add a little bit context for the question I just asked. I think for a lot of traditional industry, I think they might not have necessarily even have the technology. I think they might have some IT, right? I think a lot of challenges actually really around the bridging. What I see today is bridging the technology. I mean, some SOP or paper-based process, maybe Excel-based process into this new SaaS potentially based tool, right? Or potentially even like onboarding like some kind of on-prem system to talk to the cloud, for example. So maybe any tips there? Just trying to make the question a bit more specific.
Are you referring to your product selling to traditional industries?
That's right. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I think for selling to traditional industries, we do that a lot at Amplitude as an example, and I think it is a lot about less about potentially showing actual value through the product, but selling that value, and you need to have a really good story. So marketing collateral, strong sales team, and strong understanding of how you differ from the competition, the current solutions. And so it's heavier on the communication and documentation side, and less heavy on just showing the product. So you have to invest a lot more in people to tell the story if your product can't.
Franciska, I'm just curious to know if you have like any 1 or 2 hacks on the demand gen side, since you led demand gen.
Growth hacking. I have yet to figure that one out. I feel like there's, a lot of, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Reforge, but it's all about, linear activities that you can invest in something and then you get a return, but it's not really scalable. And then there are the loops that, compound, and you invest, but you get returns, and it gives you that exponential growth. I think initially you just got to treat everything as a potential loop and try, and see if it's something that could turn into a loop. And if not, then de-invest. Like some companies, they can invest in Facebook ads, and they spend $1 in Facebook and they get $10 in sales. If that works for you, you're damn lucky, and that's just put more money in Facebook. I think the challenge is that for dev tools and selling to technical buyers, Facebook ads very rarely will work. And so you got to get more smart and strategic with what you invest in. But there's no real silver bullet. I haven't found it. Maybe someone else has and haven't told anyone.
Awesome. Should you go ahead? Or
Yeah,
there
go ahead.
Questions. Tim, do you have any questions?
For Franciska.
Yes.
No, well, I think, well, maybe one thing, I'll throw this out there because you work with a lot of companies now, right? And especially at early stage. What is the number one thing that founders don't think about go-to-market at the really beginning?
There are a lot of things.
Let's just pick one, I guess.
A lot of the basics. Okay. I think one that's sticking with me with the companies I work with is they don't feel comfortable getting the product out as early as they probably should, and they want to keep it behind closed doors probably for longer than they should, because they have invested a lot of time and resources. They know what they want it to look like, and so yeah. Marketing usually should be a few steps ahead of the product, right? And so you can market what you don't have just yet, and do a lot of the bridging between product features and functionality and what your vision is. So get out there early, get it in front of customers and get that feedback. Apoorva, I will pass it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just roll the clock back to my time when I was leading sales at an early stage company called Quid. It might be helpful to kind of walk people through my learnings through that case study itself. So I joined Quid like when it was less than 30 people. Like it was a single $1 million, early $1 million revenue company, very small. So obviously we're trying to figure out like what the product should look like, what the go-to-market should look like. And when I left, it was a multi-million-dollar company, and we had a good exit as well before I came back to venture. That journey was interesting. There was so many learnings as a part of that journey, but I would kind of highlight 3 of them and maybe contextualize the story in those 3 points. I think one, which I really believe in, which is the product definition, like how you define the product and how what your DNA of your product is, really speaks a ton to your go-to-market choices. And there are multiple examples of that I've seen, not just at Quid itself, but also in the companies that I'm working at. And the reason it's important is because a lot of founders or people who are starting to think about founding a company think about product and go-to-market as separate things. They are very interconnected to each other, and whatever product you think about bringing to market will really impact like how you'd want to take it to market as well. And this plays out at Quid in like 3 different phases. The first phase was, and just to give you like some flavor of what that product was, it was a data platform where you applied NLP to all kinds of unstructured data to distill insights. Now, that was mostly to kind of augment whatever you're learning from all kinds of structured data. So a very horizontal platform and a pretty, and it's a vision that you're trying to convert into a product. Like Tim said in his introduction, that it's a vision that you're trying to productize, but you can't make it too wide and too broad. And the issue with the product was at that point, which is the phase 1 of the journey, it was too broad a product. And it was mostly meant for sophisticated business users. And what I mean by that is you had to understand the technical aspects of the product as well. So you needed to understand how to ingest data, how to deal with like neural nets, and also like link what insights you're getting to business outcomes. It's a tall order to ask from an exploratory product, but that's where the product was. And the company found a good foothold with a few friendlies. Like that's how you typically find early users, right? Or early adopters or even pilots or design partners, where you have friendly people who you're talking to. They want to work with you, they want to collaborate with you, they want to give you feedback. That's how we found that early usage. But there were constraints, right? There were constraints on the number of data sets side. There were constraints on the tooling that will actually dissect the data further to get to meaningful action. And the way we were selling was very top-down. It was a top-down sales model. And if you've not defined the product, if you've not defined what the market for that product is, you're basically just like going crazy to see whoever wants to bite it, they'll bite it. And then the sales cycle ended up being anywhere from like 6 to 12 months with 30 to 50K ACVs. So obviously a pretty inefficient model. And we wanted to scale beyond those handful of users and customers to more, and to scale that significantly, and also have a more repeatable go-to-market model as well. So that moves us to phase 2. And in phase 2, what we realized was what we weren't doing well was understanding who the user was, which we should have done ideally a long time back, even when the product was being conceptualized. And the foundation of that, no pun intended, should have been laid with understanding users better. But we really like dug into like existing users and existing customers and tried to understand like what were they using the product for, and what were their challenges. And then also tried to understand like what could be potential users of this product, and then basically took the product and broke that down into verticalized pieces. So we said like, it's like quid for retail, or quid for healthcare, or quid for finance. And within that, even like figured out like use cases, like what are the different use cases for different personas within those specific verticals itself. And that's what kind of led us to figure out like which are the right kind of personas to focus on when we actually go and sell. So even if you were selling top down, even if the product was complex and was meant for sophisticated business users, you at least knew like in a very targeted way that these are the kind of verticals and these are the kind of users you wanted to sell that to. By the way, verticalized means you don't change the product. The core product is still being driven by the same engine. You just like package it in a way so that it kind of feels very real to that vertical, that you are meant for that vertical and for all those use cases. And then you can go a little crazy in figuring out the data sets and the use cases in those verticals itself. Like what some use cases, something like what an Airtable is done for its users, where you kind of documented the use cases so that you inspire, this is what you can use the product for. And that helped us increase our ACVs. It helped us reduce our sales cycles. So our sales cycles went down to around 6 months or so, and ACVs also went up. And we also figured out like a very clear segment. We are going to sell to like people with 1,000 to 2,000 or 3,000 employees. And we're only going to sell to like function A and function B within those kind of companies, especially in like retail, healthcare, and finance. So focusing your target customer to that level really helped us like bring efficiency in sales. But for that, we had to define what the product was. And then that flows into phase 3, where if we had to like further equip this for hyperscale, we had to make the product further simpler, because today what the product was still complex. It still was very dependent on sophisticated business users. So you had to make it as simple as possible for even frontline users to use it, so that like people don't churn out, because when ACVs go up and people churn out, then it's a bigger impact to the business as well. So you have to figure out how to retain better. You also have to figure out how to grow better on top of that. And so we had two choices. One was to simplify the product so much that you could, like any frontline person could use it as self-serve without any support from our side, because with a complex model, you need to provide some support from your side as well. Or you build APIs on top of that. So you take the core product, you take the key features, key use cases, and convert them into APIs that heads of data and heads of IT can implement in those companies themselves. And that significantly, obviously, reduces your support, but also changes the way you think about go-to-market again. And again, that changed the way we thought about persona again. We were selling to heads of data, heads of IT, and we also figured out that we need to layer on growth marketing and ways to kind of get into the customer's hand without just a top-down sales motion. Very early signs of product, what we call product-led growth today. But that's the evolution that I saw, where it was very clear that we were defining the product, we were defining the customer, we were defining the segment, and that really led to like meaningful changes in our go-to-market strategies. So that's the first point, right? Like I think that was one core point. The second core point is I really believe in empowering, like whether it's SDRs, demand gen, and that's why one of the questions for you, Franciska, on demand gen, as well as even early founders, because in early companies, founders are doing that work themselves. really empowering them to be able to like qualify faster. So when we broke down the product at Cred into like verticalized platforms and use cases, I think what we did really well was to actually define, like, let's say, if we unlocked a verticalized vertical of healthcare, we broke that down into pharma, academic health systems. Within that, we said how many employees. We said not biotech. We said key verticals within that would be marketing and R&D functions. I'm just giving you examples. And you further filter that by saying that all those users of analytics tools like Tableau, or anyone using like maybe 3+ sources of text-rich data sources who subscribe to those sources would be the right target customer for us. So that really helped us like qualify fast, and that kind of really meaningfully shrunk our sales cycle as well. And lastly, I think one of the key takeaways for me was that taking bets on people with diverse backgrounds who are really passionate about that space really played well. So like one of our reps at that time was a rep from Coca-Cola. He had left the CPG industry and wanted to get into the tech industry. He was super passionate, really wanted to make a difference. And he also brought a very refreshing perspective to what he wanted to do. Now, I'm not suggesting that companies should start experimenting with those personas immediately early on, because early on, you need to find your foothold in the market. But as you scale a bit, I think adding that refreshing perspective, if you find someone who is very passionate and willing to make things happen, could make a huge difference. In fact, he was one of the people who helped close 5 enterprise accounts for us in a quarter eventually, and also helped us get into a vertical called the mining vertical, which we'd never thought of that we could get into. So it's those are kind of the key takeaways, which out of the many more that I've amassed over my time as a go-to-market practitioner. But hopefully that will be helpful.
Well, there's a question on sales hire, so maybe you can start on that one. So what are the top traits or things you suggest looking for to identify the right first B2B sales hire? And then how do you suggest structuring compensation for that hire when the startup is around seed and still working to prove product market fit?
So I think one of the traits is definitely if you've sold to a similar audience before, sold or worked in a similar space before. Like for example, when we are thinking of like developer tools companies and we are thinking of hiring someone to kind of accelerate the sales motion over there, whether an AE or a rep or even a VP of sales, we're thinking of someone who's worked in either developer tools, broadly the infrastructure space, could be data, could be anything else, but has an ability to kind of not just talk on a very salesy way, but also in a very technical way. It shouldn't sound salesy anyways. If it's sounding very technical and very authentic, it automatically becomes a good sales motion. But someone who can go really deep in understanding technology and can speak that language, because if you're building a developer-first company, you really want someone that developers feel authentic and can understand their pain points well. So that's the trait that I would look for, is being able to understand technology beyond being able to sell and beyond understanding the sales motion itself. I think structuring compensation is a tricky thing. There are many ways that you can answer that question. So it's a longer conversation as well. Maybe we should have a session on that to kind of cover all aspects of compensation.
For sure. One thing I would add on the traits as well is if you are looking for a first sales hire, it should be someone who ideally have been in an early stage startup in the past and is resourceful and okay with doing a lot of their own lead gen, a lot of their maybe own collateral and maybe some of the things that YAs and in bigger companies have enablement teams and marketing teams and PMMs to do for them. So someone who is not afraid to sort of have a bit of a broader remit than maybe you would normally see an AE or SDR have.
Yeah, I guess maybe last points. There is no rights first B2B sales hire for most other companies. It's funny. I think every founder wants to find the best the perfect backgrounds that has done everything, but no startup can able to afford doing that. So I think it comes down to actually able to identify, not just from a background perspective, but you also need to take a bet, and learning how to take bets and learning what is the right kind of bets also takes time to learn as a founder. But people matter. I feel like the people personality traits and how fast they can learn and do things will matter more than how exactly it perfectly fits from on a paper. Yeah,
for sure. There's one more question around how you get feedback, early feedback, when it's difficult to talk to customers and specifically trying to convince them to talk to you. So I guess getting those first design partners.
Yeah, we have a session next time actually
about
this. So I don't know how much we want to go after this topic, but you
gotta wait a month to get the answer. No, I can I can share a little bit.
Yeah, we can share something, right? Everyone has this problem. Yeah, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, you can start sharing for sure.
Yeah, I can share a little bit what we did at Iteratively. So the two co-founders and Patrick is actually going to be a speaker next time, so he can dive into this way more. But just asking for feedback, meeting people, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, use your network, use your investors, and be in any communities that are related to your startup. So are there any Slack communities, Discords, anywhere that you can lend a helping hand, offer your help and guidance, and get feedback from the community? That will go a long way. And I'm sure Patrick will share more next time around that. But that really worked for us at Iteratively.
Yeah, and as a founder myself, right, that was wasn't the biggest problem to get to talk to people, but obviously trying to reach that many people to talk to is every founder's challenge, right? And I think we all learned over time what are things that will work and what doesn't work, but it's a mindset change for the most part for most founders. Actually, a lot of times we're out there trying to solicit feedback. We're trying to take from other people, but as much as possible, there's anything you can give to them as a way to provide anything. And I realized in the end, once I learn more about who they are and what they're looking for and what their days is like, you finally start to realize, okay, there are things you can do actually, right? They're very curious about this market. What is actually something I really need to learn? What are other things that can actually be maybe not really related to your product at all, but Head at Eng is always looking for more people to hire, right? For example, or whatever value you can actually potentially bring, it's very relevant. And I leverage it a lot, because hey, we were in the open source ecosystem for so long. Docker, Kubernetes, we know lots of details and people, and so often comes into we are helping them to also learn about this market as much, and that helps. It switches the table a lot. I mean, one last thing is, some early customers can be in your cap table, for example, or advisor actually giving you equity shares, and that's a very sometimes a very effective hack as well.
And not to forget that they actually start with your friend circle themselves, right? You don't never consider your friends as potentially people who could be your customer personas, but talking to a lot of your friend circles can also help start your conversations, and then it can go from one to another and to another, because each of them have their own networks as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Should I?
Yeah.
Should we round it up?
Yeah.
I'll just share quickly the next few talks and what we'll dive into, and then I think we'd love for everyone here to either submit ideas here in chat. I think we have some ideas already around building a early sales team and how to think about compensation and hiring. But anything else, pop it in the chat or message us on LinkedIn or elsewhere, Twitter, wherever you go. But next time we'll be talking about how to get those first 10 design partners, and we'll have two speakers on, one that was more focused on getting end users and one that was more focused on getting actual businesses and getting that those relationships built and build that feedback loop and how you get most out of them. The next one after that will be around how to think about your content marketing strategy, distribution of content and community around it. So things like SEO, thought leadership, and how you get your content out there to the world. And then the following episode will be solely around building a community and how to think about community strategy and execution in 2022. So those are the upcoming ones. Hopefully they resonate with you all. If they don't, let us know what will resonate and what will be beneficial topics, and we'll get those lined up after these.
Great. This was mostly meant to be a kickoff, and I'm glad so many of you joined, and looking forward to having more of you in the next few sessions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you all.
All right. Bye.
Bye.